It was 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday when my phone lit up. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a notification from an email address I hadn't seen in 5 years. Hannah. My sister. There was no subject line, no hello. No, how have you been? Just a link to a luxury baby registry and a single line of text that read, I know you're doing well now. We expect a $6,000 contribution for the nursery. Don't be petty. I stared at the screen. The audacity wasn't just shocking. It was breathtaking. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. 5 years ago, reading that email would have shattered me. I would have spiraled into a panic, wondering how my own flesh and blood could be so callous, but the woman who used to cry on the bathroom floor died a long time ago. She didn't survive the day. Joshua looked at me with cold clinical disgust and called me a pig. I remember the scene with photographic clarity. I was 24, pregnant and suffering from hyperemesis. It sounds like a medical condition, but in reality it felt like a slow execution. My world had shrunk to the 4 walls of our living room, the smell of stale crackers and the constant violent nausea that made standing upright impossible. The apartment was a mess because I was a mess. When Joshua walked in that evening, he didn't see a wife carrying his child. He saw a liability. He kicked a discarded snack wrapper across the floor and looked down at me where I lay on the sofa. You look like a pig who has given up, he said. There was no anger in his voice, which made it worse. It was just pure, unadulterated disappointment. And Hannah laughed. My sister was sitting in the armchair looking pristine in a designer dress she likely couldn't afford. She didn't defend me. She joined him. I would never let myself go like that, she said, smoothing her hair. Pregnancy isn't an excuse to be gross, Emily. It's about self-control. Looking back now with the clarity of distance, I understand the mechanics of what she was doing. It wasn't just simple cruelty. It was a necessary psychological transaction. To steal my husband and destroy my life, Hannah had to convince herself that I wasn't fully human anymore. I was just an obstacle. A mess. A pig. By reducing me to something grotesque, she normalized her own treachery. It is a common trap for narcissists. They must dehumanize their victims to immunize their own consciences. She wasn't betraying a sister. In her mind, she was simply upgrading the family stock. That was the afternoon she dropped the bomb that ended my marriage. She claimed she was pregnant. And not just pregnant, she claimed she was carrying a boy. The heir Joshua's family had always obsessed over. I am 3 months along, she lied, placing a manicured hand over her flat stomach. And look at me. No sickness, no mess, just perfection. That is how a real woman carries a child. Joshua didn't hesitate. He looked at me pale and shivering under a blanket, and then at her glowing with health and deceit. He made a business decision. He chose the fantasy over the reality. He asked for a divorce the next morning. He left me with nothing but the nausea and the silence, convinced that he was trading up for a better model. Reading her email now demanding $6,000 for a nursery, I realized nothing had changed. She didn't see me as a person. She still saw me as a resource to be harvested, a pig to be slaughtered for her benefit whenever she needed cash. She thought I was still that broken girl on the bathroom floor, desperate for approval. She was wrong. I wasn't broken anymore. I was balanced, and I was about to audit her entire existence. My finger hovered over the block button. My entire body was vibrating with a frequency that felt dangerously close to panic. It was the old reflex, the one Hannah had installed in me 5 years ago, the urge to disappear, to make myself small, to avoid the conflict because I knew I would lose. I was about to tap the screen to erase her demand and pretend it never reached me when a hand gently covered mine. It was Jason. My husband didn't look like a savior in that moment. He looked like exactly what he was, the director of high-end credit services for one of the city's most exclusive financial firms. He was 45 years old, wearing his reading glasses and a silk robe, holding a tablet in his other hand. He didn't say a word. He just took my phone from my trembling grip and read the email. I waited for the explosion. I waited for him to ask why my sister was demanding $6,000, or why she was calling me petty. I waited for the confusion that usually comes when normal people encounter the insanity of my family. He didn't look angry. He looked clinical. He looked like he was reviewing a quarterly risk assessment that had just flagged a critical error. Hannah, he said, testing the name on his tongue like a sommelier tasting a corked wine. Give it back, I whispered, my voice tight. I'm just going to block her. I can't deal with this, Jason. I can't go back there. No, he said. The word was soft but absolute. He walked over to the kitchen island and set my phone down next to his tablet. He began typing, his fingers moving with a rhythmic, practiced precision. You aren't going to block her, Emily. Blocking her implies that she has power. It implies that you are hiding. I am hiding, I admitted. She destroyed me once. She wants money. If I don't give it to her, she'll escalate. She'll find a way to hurt us. Jason stopped typing. He looked up at me, his eyes cold and clear behind his glasses. She can't hurt us, he said, because she doesn't have any leverage. She thinks she's operating from a position of strength because she has the audacity to ask. But audacity isn't currency. Facts are currency. He turned the tablet around. On the screen was a profile. It wasn't a social media page or a family tree. It was a dossier, a financial profile. I saw Hannah's name at the top, followed by a series of red flags that looked like a crime scene. I recognize the name, Jason said calmly. Not because she's your sister, but because her name crossed my desk 3 weeks ago. She applied for a platinum line of credit with my firm. We denied it in 12 seconds. I stared at him. What? She is a liability, Emily, Jason said, his voice dropping to that low professional register he used in boardrooms. She isn't wealthy. She isn't successful. She is a walking default notice, and judging by this email, she is desperate. He picked up my phone again. He didn't delete the email. He stared at it for a long moment, calculating. We aren't blocking her, Jason repeated. We are going to accept her invitation. We are going to drive over there, see the nursery, and deliver a response in person. Jason, no, I pleaded. I don't have $6,000 for her. I know, he said, a small sharp smile touching the corners of his mouth. Neither do I. But I have something much more valuable. I have a gift she actually deserves. 2 weeks later, Jason and I pulled up to the security gate of the estates at Riverview. It was the kind of gated community that sold the idea of exclusivity while being built on reclaimed swampland. The guard checked our names against a list, his eyes lingering on Jason's vintage Porsche. It was understated, classic, and completely paid for. It was a stark contrast to the leased Mercedes SUV parked in Hannah's driveway when we finally pulled up to the house. The villa itself was a monument to trying too hard. It had columns that didn't support anything and a fountain that wasn't running. It was a stage set designed to impress people who didn't know any better. I stepped out of the car, smoothing my linen trousers. I wasn't wearing jewelry, just my wedding band. Hannah, by contrast, opened the front door looking like a walking billboard for a fast fashion brand's idea of wealth. You made it, she said, her voice pitched high and tight. She didn't hug me. She air-kissed near my cheek, careful not to smudge her heavy makeup. I was worried you'd get lost. It's quite a maze in here for people who aren't used to this level of security. We found it just fine, Jason said smoothly. He shook her hand, and I saw his eyes do a quick, terrifying scan of the room. He wasn't looking at the decor. He was looking at the assets. Or the lack thereof. We walked into the living room. It was furnished in white leather and glass, cold, impractical, and expensive. But as I sat down on the sofa, I noticed the tag tucked discreetly under the cushion. It was a rental barcode, the kind used by high-end staging companies. Jason noticed it too. Then Joshua walked in. If Hannah was the manic energy of the delusion, Joshua was the cost. He looked 10 years older than 32. His shoulders were slumped, his skin gray and pasty. He wore a polo shirt that was too tight, straining against a stomach that spoke of stress eating and cheap alcohol. He didn't look at me. He looked at the floor, muttering a hello that sounded more like an apology. So, Hannah said, clapping her hands together as she perched on the edge of an armchair. What do you think? We wanted plenty of space for the little prince. He's going to be the heir to the architectural legacy after all. She patted her stomach just as she had 5 years ago. Joshua's family is so thrilled. We need everything to be perfect. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my plain blouse. I see you're still economical with your style, Emily. That's good. It's smart to save money when you need to. The insult was so blunt it was almost funny. 5 years ago it would have stung. Now it just felt like watching a child play dress-up in clothes that didn't fit. She had no idea that the linen I was wearing cost more than her entire outfit. She couldn't see quality. She could only see logos. We try to be practical, I said, my voice steady. Well, practicality is fine, she sniffed. But family is about generosity. Speaking of which, she extended a manicured hand, palm up, her eyes gleaming with naked greed. Did you bring the contribution? The decorator is coming tomorrow and we need the deposit. Joshua flinched. He actually closed his eyes, as if the shame was physically painful. Jason stood up. He didn't reach for his wallet. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope made of cream-colored cardstock. It looked important. It looked expensive. We brought something better than a check, Jason said. Hannah's eyes lit up. She practically snatched the envelope from Jason's hand, her fingers digging into the expensive cardstock. I watched her weigh it in her palm, her mind racing with calculations. It was thick. It was heavy. To someone like Hannah, weight meant cash. It meant piles of bills that could be spent on appearances, on silencing the creditors for another month, on maintaining the delusion that she was better than everyone else. Oh, Jason, she cooed, her entire demeanor shifting from haughty to saccharine in a nanosecond. You really didn't have to go all out. But I suppose when you're successful, generosity just comes naturally. It does, Jason agreed, his voice dangerously level. Go ahead, open it. We want to make sure you see exactly what we're contributing. Joshua leaned forward, a flicker of hope in his dull eyes. He probably thought this was his lifeline. He probably thought this envelope was going to save him from the crushing pressure of living a lie he couldn't afford. Hannah tore the seal. The sound was loud in the quiet room, a sharp rip that echoed like a gunshot. She reached inside, expecting the crisp friction of currency. Instead, her fingers met the smooth, glossy surface of stapled documents. She pulled them out. A stack of papers dense with columns, numbers, and red ink. For a moment there was silence. Hannah stared at the top page, her brow furrowing. She flipped to the second page, then the third. Her smile faltered, then vanished. Her face went from confused to pale to a sickly shade of gray. What is this? She whispered. The paper shook in her hand. It's a statement, Jason said. He crossed his legs, looking perfectly at ease in the center of their collapsing world. A comprehensive financial statement. You see, Hannah, when you applied for that platinum line of credit 3 weeks ago, you authorized a full forensic audit of your assets and liabilities. Most people don't read the fine print. I do. Hannah dropped the papers onto the glass coffee table as if they were burning her skin. They fanned out, revealing the truth she had been hiding for years. That isn't money, she choked out. No, Jason replied. It's reality. He leaned forward and tapped the summary line at the bottom of the first page. Total outstanding unsecured debt $248,000. You have 6 maxed-out credit cards, 3 personal loans in default, and a lien on this luxury furniture that you haven't paid for in 4 months. Joshua made a sound, a strangled gasp of air. He grabbed the papers from the table, his eyes scanning the columns frantically. 200. Hannah, what is this? You said the investments were paying out? You said we were liquid. We are, she shrieked, her voice cracking. This is a mistake, he's lying, he's just trying to humiliate us because he's jealous. I'm not jealous, Hannah, Jason said, his voice cutting through her hysteria like a scalpel. And I'm not lying. I'm the director of the division that denied your application. You've been living on a credit line that expired 90 days ago. You aren't solvent. You are technically insolvent. He stood up then, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He wasn't the polite brother-in-law anymore. He was the institution. He was the consequences she had been running from. You asked for a contribution, Jason said coldly. This is it. I'm not here to give you money for a nursery you can't afford. I'm here to collect the collateral on the life you stole. That's a lie, Hannah screamed, her voice cracking into a desperate, jagged sound. She tried to swipe the papers off the table, but they scattered across the floor, face up, like an accusation that refused to be silenced. Those are old cards. I paid them off years ago. This is privacy infringement. I'll sue you. Jason didn't even blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply reached into the envelope and pulled out a second stack of documents, smaller but infinitely more damning. You can't sue me, Hannah, he said calmly, because you don't have a lawyer. You have a public defender waiting for you if you don't start telling the truth. But let's look at the history, shall we? He flipped to a page marked with yellow highlighters. May 12th, 5 years ago, Jason read aloud. I felt a chill go down my spine. I remembered it perfectly. That was the week I was hospitalized for dehydration. That was the week Joshua had packed his bags, telling me he couldn't handle the drama of my sickness anymore. According to your version of events, Jason said, turning his gaze to Joshua, Hannah was also pregnant during this time. She was the perfect pregnant woman. Glowing, healthy, bedridden only by the delicate nature of carrying a male heir. Joshua nodded slowly, his eyes glued to the paper in Jason's hand. Then explain this, Jason said. He tapped the highlighted line. May 12th. 8 p.m. A $450 charge at the Bluefin. That's a sushi bar, isn't it? Raw fish. Sake. Hannah froze. May 13th, Jason continued, his finger sliding down the page. $300 at Vintage Vines. A case of Chardonnay, and here on May 15th. A recurring subscription to a weight loss clinic for appetite suppressants. He looked up and his expression was one of clinical pity. These aren't the purchases of a pregnant woman, Joshua. These are the receipts of a woman who was drinking wine and eating sushi while her sister was in the hospital. There was no baby. There was no miscarriage. There was only a very expensive performance. Joshua made a sound that was half sob, half retch. He stared at Hannah, and for the first time in 5 years, the fog in his eyes cleared. He didn't see the golden girl anymore. He saw the con artist. You lied, Joshua whispered. About the baby. About everything. It doesn't matter, Hannah yelled, backing away toward the kitchen. That was years ago. We're married now. We have a life. You don't have a life, Jason corrected her. You have an illusion. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the rented view. You see, Hannah, people like you always make the same mistake. You think status is something you can buy on credit. You think if you wear the right clothes and live in the right zip code, you become the person you're pretending to be. But true wealth is quiet. It doesn't need to prove anything. Your debt, this house, these cars, it was just a scream for attention. You bought the costume of a wealthy wife, but you couldn't afford the character. He turned back to Joshua. And that brings us to the final document. Jason reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper. It wasn't a bank statement. It was legal-sized. It had a seal on the top. When our forensic team went through the liability trail, they found a liquidation order for the Miller Family Architectural Trust. It was processed 6 months ago. Joshua's head snapped up. What, that trust is locked until I turn 35? It was locked, Jason said, until a hardship withdrawal was filed. The reason cited was medical emergency. The signature at the bottom reads, Joshua Miller. Jason handed the paper to Joshua, but the handwriting expert confirmed it matches the signature on Hannah's credit card applications. She forged your name, Joshua. She liquidated your entire inheritance to pay the interest on her cards. She didn't just spend her money, she stole your future. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a universe imploding. Joshua looked at the document, then at Hannah. The hatred in his eyes was so pure, so toxic, it almost sucked the air out of the room. You stole it, Joshua said, his voice trembling with a lethal quiet. You stole my family's money. I did it for us, Hannah screeched, her mask finally shattering completely. To keep this house, to keep up appearances. You're a failure, Joshua. You don't make enough to support me. I had to do it. Jason took my arm. I think our business here is done, he said softly. We didn't stay for the encore. As Joshua's voice rose into a scream, and Hannah began sobbing, that same performative, hysterical sobbing she used to get her way as a child, Jason simply opened the front door. We walked out of the rented villa, past the leased SUV, and into the humid evening air. We didn't look back. Behind us, the house of cards was collapsing, loud and violent, but it sounded distant, like a thunderstorm moving away from us. The fallout was swift and absolute. When you build a life on fraud, the end doesn't come in stages, it comes all at once. Joshua filed for divorce the next morning. He also filed criminal charges. It turns out that forging a spouse's signature to liquidate a trust fund is a felony that carries a mandatory prison sentence. Hannah is currently out on bail, living in a motel because the villa was repossessed 3 days after our visit. She has tried to call me 47 times. I haven't blocked her. I just watch the phone ring until it stops. It's a reminder that her emergencies are no longer my emergencies. That night back at our own home, a home we actually own, Jason and I made dinner. There were no snacks. There was no mess. We grilled steaks and opened a bottle of wine that we drank because we enjoyed it, not because we needed to prove we could afford it. As we sat on our patio, listening to the crickets, Jason asked me the only question that mattered. Do you feel better? I thought about it. I thought about the vindication. I thought about the look of absolute terror on Hannah's face when the illusion shattered. And I realized something profound. For years, I thought the opposite of love was hate. I thought that to truly get over what they did to me, I had to hate them with a fire that would burn them down. But hate is exhausting. Hate requires maintenance. Hate is a subscription you pay for with your own peace of mind. I took a sip of wine and looked at my husband. I don't feel better, I said. I feel nothing. And that is the true victory. It is the freedom of indifference. I don't wish them pain and I don't wish them well. They have simply ceased to be relevant to my existence. I have evicted them from my head. I have closed the account. The ledger is balanced, the debt is written off, and for the first time in 5 years, the silence in my mind isn't lonely, it's peaceful. Have you ever realized that your haters were actually just drowning in their own mess? Share this story if you believe that the best revenge is a quiet, happy life.